Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Yamaha Rightwaters Kenai Classic Roundtable on National Sport Fishing Policy. We welcome everyone here to Soldotna, Alaska. My name is Shannon Martin. I'm the Executive Director for the Kenai River Sportfishing Association. Kenai River Sportfishing Association is the largest sportfish advocacy organization in Alaska. We're dedicated to ensuring the sustainability of the Kenai River. Today, you will hear from Alaskans and also experts and leaders from the lower 48, where they'll shed light and share knowledge on fisheries issues. These are discussions that are not unique to Alaska and our diverse fisheries, but they can also affect anglers and user groups nationwide. And with that being said, without further ado, we have a very busy agenda today. I'd like to introduce Kevin Delaney to kick off the Classic Roundtable.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, I'm not Senator Murkowski, who was scheduled to give the opening remarks. And Lisa's a personal friend of mine and my family's, as is Vern, her husband. And we wish them well. We hope that she recovers quickly. I am the Senior Fishery Management Consultant for Kenai River Sportfishing Association. Prior to doing this, I spent 30 years with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, starting in Kodiak, Alaska in the early 70s as a scuba diver on king and tanner crab research, and then finally getting my head above water and coming to Cook Inlet and beginning to work with salmon. I rose up not only out of the depths of the North Pacific, but through the Department of Fish and Game to become the director of the Division of Sport Fisheries in the late 1990s. And after retiring and fooling around with horses and financial advising, I came back to Kenai River Sportfishing Association as their senior fishery management consultant. I was here at the birth of this organization. Thank you, Bob Penny. Thank you, Ted Stevens, who are both people that had a dramatic influence on the organization and my life, and have helped shepherd the organization through, what is that then, close to 40 years. Kenai River Sportfishing Association, as Shannon said, is the premier conservation and advocacy organization that speaks for the resource first, for sport, personal use, non-commercial uses in general. And we take into account the complexity. We look at the science, along with myself as senior fishery management biologist. We have a scientist who's very famous, Ray Beamister, works down in Oregon, worked a lot with Endangered Species Act issues, has been with us for 20 some years, and others, including the board of directors of the Kenai River Sportfishing Association, many of which are in the audience today or listening in. Very committed people, very, very committed to the conservation. And I can speak as, their tip of the spear on certain issues, that these people take the time to listen and learn and to do the right thing. I could go on and on about Kenai River Sportfishing Association. Since its birth in 1984, I've either stood on the bench next to people like Bob Penny and Ben Ellis and helped where I could. Eldon Mulder, who's in the crowd today. Always been impressed with the level of commitment and the level of hard work that they're willing to put in to see that the right things are done. Shannon said they're a 503 charitable organization. Events like the Classic have enabled them to raise millions of dollars over the year to put to work on fisheries habitat, fisheries management issues, and do good things in the community. Since I'm not Senator Murkowski, and since I've already done the little spiel about KRSA, I've always heard that before you launch into the rest of it, you should either do a joke or tell a story. And I'm terrible at telling jokes, so I'm going to tell a story. I told you already I was a scuba diver in the North Pacific over in Kodiak in the early 70s. Well, prior to that, in college, I'd been a competitive racquetball player. there aren't any racquetball courts in Kodiak. So I'd come over to Anchorage during the fur rondays in February, back in the 70s. And there was only one place to play racquetball in Anchorage, and that was at Bob Penny's tennis club over in McGraw. So I knocked on the door one day and I said to this lady who took me in like I was her son and said, go forth, do your thing. And I took on all comers and did pretty well. Well, that was Vern Martell's mom. And she said, there's this guy you need to meet. And so she drags me over and says, this is Bob Penny. And that's how it all started. I mean, Alaska is such an interesting place. The degrees of separation, what is it, 7 or so that are renowned? Well, it's 1 or 2 or 3 here at the very most. And here we are, close to, 45 years later. And I am so happy to be here today to talk to you guys. I want to tell one more story because it's really an important story about the Kenai River. It's the story of the evolution of salmon management in the Kenai from the early 1970s through today, told through the eyes of somebody that was privileged enough to have lived it. Let's set the context. This year, we have to our knowledge, record low run of late run king salmon, early run as well. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12,000 fish, of which maybe 8,000 are large kings. Large kings are ones that we can count with our sonar unit. They're more than 34 inches in length. Even more, well, no, I won't start there. The sockeye, the other really large, important run along with coho salmon, but the sockeye are the large run. Today, Kenai produces 3 to 4 million fish a year. We want 1 million, 1.5 million of them to spawn, the rest to be harvested by all different user groups. So 10 to 12,000 kings, 3+ million sockeye. Now let's roll back to the 1970s. In the 1970s, the escapement goal for sockeye was 150,000 fish. Remember, I just said now we want 1.5 million to spawn. And there was no enumeration on king salmon. Everybody knew there was this early run because once it got through the occluded waters of the lower Kenai, they ascend the clear water streams and you can see them. But I met people in the 70s that didn't even know there was a late run. In fact, I met people that said, we're seeing some fish in July, and we think somebody illegally released Columbia River king salmon smolt into the Kenai, and they're starting to take hold. I mean, that's what it was like in the early 70s. And then guys like Bob Penny and others figured out that you could fish from a moving boat and be very, very effective. And kind of the rest is history when it comes to the fishery. But let's look at the regulation and the assessment programs that took place. Another thing you really need to know is that in the late 70s, we had the Magnuson Act, which kicked foreign fleets out of our exclusive economic zone, put them 200 miles offshore. Boy, when those gill nets left, that made a big difference. But also, the ocean shifted to a much more favorable ocean regime for salmon in general, but king salmon from Alaska in particular. I was flying surveys in the early 1970s up in the northern part of Cook Inlet, streams like the Deshka, Lake Creek, Soldotna, and you'd see hundreds to low thousands of fish. By 1977, 1978, you were looking at tens of thousands of fish in those same locations. Ocean conditions combined with the pushing of the foreign fleets out of our exclusive economic zone made a huge difference. Assessment of king salmon on the Kenai River. Finally, in the mid-1980s, we met some people who, when I say we, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, who said, we can count these things with sonar. We did it in the Navy. We can do it in the Kenai River. And we said, go forth. Let's see. And they deployed sonar that was called side scanning sonar at the time. Now, we were already counting sockeye with sonar, but it was Bendix sonar, and it laid on the bottom. Sockeye run right next to the shore. And it could determine that a fish went by determining the air bladder. You could see the density differences. But kings who move out in the thalwag of the river, the central current area of the river, you couldn't count them with Bendix sonar. So the side scan stuff, shot out from the bank and gave us the ability to see them. And again, it was detecting the difference in density between the meat and the air bladder. But what it didn't do, it just clicked when a fish went by. There went another one. There went another one. We couldn't tell if they were going upstream or down. So sonar involved. We went to split beam. Split beam gave us the ability to tell whether they entered one side or the other, and you can tell whether they went up and downstream. And that gave us a lot better idea of how many fish there were. Still, it had weaknesses, as all scientific assessment does. 1985, we got an estimate. 1986, we got an estimate. 1987, we got an estimate. 1988, we went to the Alaska Board of Fisheries and we said, we're ready to establish an escapement goal for late run Kenai River king salmon, early run as well, and build a management plan that enabled us to assure sustainable management practices, because those king salmon are also harvested in the commercial fisheries that are taking sockeye. Now, remember I said there were like 150,000 sockeye we wanted to spawn, and, maybe 700,000 came back. Well, the science there evolved as well. And we went from 150,000 to 175,000 to 250,000, and then to a range of 500 to 800,000. And you know what happened? Well, what I start out with, now we're at a total return of 3 to 4 million. We've had returns of over 8 million. So that's good. But the amount of commercial fishing activity that it takes to harvest 1 million or 2 million fish is a lot more than it takes to harvest 300 to 400,000 fish. And the king's got to run this same gauntlet, especially along the beach. So we were lucky. We had phenomenal ocean conditions and lots of king salmon all the way through the 1980s, 1990s. Not to say there wasn't conflicts. I mean, yeah, there were allocation conflicts. There were fish wars in Cook Inlet. But we were achieving escapements in our estimation of 25, 30, 40,000 kings, along with the sockeye. And, we kind of believed, for better or for worse, that we were bomb-proof. We were really good at this. And then came 2012. And to the best of our knowledge, we were going to fall considerably short of our escapement objective for late-run king salmon. We had a big sockeye run, and we closed the door. We said no more fishing, no more sport fishing for kings in the river this year, no more fishing on the beach. We pushed the drift fleet a little bit further offshore and took a good hard look at our sonar unit. And our assessment there was, well, maybe we could do better. So we went to a new sonar unit called Aries, which is much the same as the others, and it's not really important for this, but it does show the intent of staying on top of the technology that it takes to do good science. 2012 was considered the disaster year for late run king salmon. And each and every year since, we've been just hanging on by our fingernails until the last 3 years, where abundance has dropped off significantly. So numerically, you don't have to remember this. There's not going to be a quiz later, but we want to see we'd love to see about 20,000 king salmons, late run king salmon, big ones. When I say big ones, I mean, again, over 34 inches, because our sonar unit has a hard time telling big sockeye from little kings. So we just count big kings. Now, we know they comprise anywhere from 60 to 70% of the total population. You can go back and look at size and age construction and make estimates all day long. But we're down. We want at least 13,500, 14,000 late run kings, big kings. We'd love to see 20, 25, 30,000. Historically, the 20-year average prior to 2012 was probably 40,000 that we got. So it's still sustainable, but something's going on. Ocean conditions have changed dramatically, and they do not favor king salmon now. We're pumping millions and millions of pink salmon fry from our hatcheries into the North Pacific Ocean that have to eat and create some competition for other species. But what we're doing right is the state, when I say we here, the state of Alaska, with the support of the Kenai River Sportfishing Association and the Department of Fish and Game, by the way, we're closing fisheries where we have to. We're letting millions of dollars of economic activity go upstream to make sure that when ocean conditions can change, that we once again will have a real bountiful return of king salmon. And before you think, well, that'll never happen. On the year I was born, 1951, the drift fleet harvested 150,000 northern Cook Inlet king salmon. And conventional wisdom is it kind of broke the back of the run. And we limped along through the 50s, 60s, until those days of the early 70s that I started this story with those hundreds or low thousands of fish that grew back into tens and hundreds of thousands of fish. One thing I've learned over the years is the fish are in charge. So welcome to the Classic. I hope that you didn't miss out on too much from Senator Murkowski, who I said is a wonderful lady and a good friend. But I'll be here the rest of the time. Come and grab me. I'll tell stories till the cows come home. And thank you very much for your attendance. And I think I'm handing it off now to Senator Sullivan in some manner. And again, thank you very much.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. And this is not the way I wanted to participate in the Kenai Classic, one of my favorite things to do all year. So first, let me apologize to the team out there, and let me thank the team. Shannon is doing a great job. Kevin, those are really, really good comments. By the way, I'm watching live stream. My team is there. I think a lot of you know Elena Spraker, who does a great job for me on the Kenai and in Kodiak. Larry Burton, my chief of staff. Adam Trombley, my state director. Amanda Coyne, who is my counselor and very smart advisor. So they're all there. And again, I really, really wanted to be there. Unfortunately, I think like Senator Murkowski, I've come down with a little bit of a cold, fever. I don't know what it is. I kind of pride myself on never getting sick. I'm not sure I've ever missed an event in almost 10 years as your senator from being sick. But for whatever reason, I got hit with something pretty substantial. I'm going to try and make it tomorrow and be at the dinner and everything. So I apologize, and I really wanted to get out there. Fishing in the morning 2 years ago, I caught the second largest silver, and that proudly is displayed in my DC office. So I was going to try and break that record. But what I wanted to do before I introduce the Marine Debris Foundation panel, which I'm really excited to watching them about, is to give you a sense of some of the broader, more complex issues that we are working on that relate to fishing in Alaska. And this is literally everything: commercial fishing, sport and recreational fishing, which is so important, subsistence fishing. When I got to the Commerce Committee, I served on that committee 9.5 years ago. I like to say that Alaska is the superpower of seafood. Everybody on the Commerce Committee knows that phrase now because I repeat it about once a week during hearings, but it is true. And we want to keep it that way across all the different sectors. And of course, we have a lot of challenges. But what I wanted to mention today, before we got to the ocean debris topic, which I'm very passionate about, is just to give an update on a couple things that we're working on. A lot of it we've legislated on. And as Kevin just mentioned, you know, fishing issues in our state and our country can be contentious. Interestingly, when I was looking over some of the comments I was going to make, almost all of these issues that I'm going to talk about that we have legislated on unify Alaskans, and as opposed to divide us. And I actually really think, despite some of the challenges, despite some of the contentious issues, that most issues dealing with fisheries, sport, subsistence, commercial, actually unify us. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to remember, because I think we can lose sight of that. So let me just go through a little bit of a list here for an update on issues that I think everybody here cares about. And I wanted to provide an update on what we're doing back in DC on these. The first one is dealing with the unbelievably unfair situation and really damaging situation we have had with Russian seafood. Some of you know the Russians in 2014 banned the importation of any American Alaskan seafood into Russia. That was 10 years ago. It was in retaliation for the Obama administration's sanctions on Russia after they invaded Crimea. We have had this unlevel playing field for 10 years where we haven't been able to export one fish to Russia, and they have literally been flooding the market with salmon, with pollock, with all other kinds of species, and deliberately saying, we know that we're at war with America's fisheries and we're going to wipe them out. So my view is that if the Russians are saying, hey, they're at war with us, we ought to think about going to war against them. So I tried to get that loophole closed during the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration, and it literally took an act of war to fix the problem. What do I mean by that? When Russia invaded Ukraine, I went to the White House and said, hey, you guys can put sanctions on Russia. Let's finally sanction their seafood industry. They're trying to wipe out ours, and we have this unlevel playing field. Let's block the importation of all Russian seafood into America. It's only fair. They've been doing that to us for 10 years. They're flooding the market with all kinds of salmon and other species. And this is called an unbelievable unlevel playing field. And by the way, a lot of the Russian fish owners are oligarchs that support Putin and his war in Ukraine. So we worked with the Biden administration. It took 2 years, but we finally convinced them. And trust me, I was texting, calling these guys, no kidding, about once a day. I think I became a royal pain in their rear. And they did it. And then you may have heard the Russians, working with their communist buddies in China, started taking all their fish that was blocked coming into America, sending it to China to be beheaded and gutted and filleted, and then still sending it into the United States. So in December, that dictatorship loophole, as I called it, we got the Biden administration to shut that down. So right now there is no Russian seafood that can come into our market, even going through China. And I have met with Prime Minister of Canada recently, Justin Trudeau, the president of the trade minister for the European Union, and got the Biden administration to get the G7, the entire G7 countries, the industrialized democracies, in their leader statements, all to put out a focus on trying to block the importation of Russian seafood into all those countries. I think the Canadians and the EU are getting ready to do that soon. So this is a win, and it's good for Alaska, regardless of whether you care about commercial or sport or subsistence fishing. Having this kind of unfair situation that was really harming our coastal communities wasn't good, and we're going to go on offense now against the Russians. As I like to say, we need to convince Americans to eat freedom fish, Alaskan fish, not dictator communist fish from China or Russia. And we're finally, after 10 years, making progress on that. So that's an issue that my team and I have been relentless on, because very few issues are just call out for something that's so unfair and so harmful to our fellow Alaskans. So that's progress. And now we're going to get other countries to ban the importation of Russian seafood and really crush those guys. So that's the first topic that we've been focused on a lot. The second one builds on what Kevin was just saying, and we really, really want to ask your help on this. Kevin was talking about, and we're all really concerned about this giant variability with regard to our salmon runs throughout Alaska. He talks about 2012 as this kind of moment on the Kenai. Some of you know my wife's family has a fish camp on the Yukon where they've been fishing for kings in the Middle River Yukon for about, thousands of years. My wife, Julie. And that fishery has been devastated. Fish and Game and the Canadians recently agreed to a 7-year hiatus in terms of harvesting kings, even subsistence on the Yukon. We're working with Doug and others to see if there's a way to help the subsistence users at least to be able to do some king fishing. But this is just devastating. And my wife's family, our daughters, who've been going to this fish camp since they were born, we haven't been able to fish on that at our fish camp for 5 years. And of course, this goes to food security, it goes to the culture and heritage of our native communities. So in my wife's urging, a year and a half ago, I put forward legislation called the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act. And the whole goal of this was to say, all right, we have this incredible variability. We have really strong sockeye runs in Bristol Bay and other parts of the state. Then we have these devastatingly horrible Yukon and Kuskokwim king runs and Kenai runs for kings. What is happening? What is happening? So the goal of this legislation, which passed a year and a half ago, was to bring the best minds, literally, state, you saw how smart Kevin is, Fish and Game, excuse me, Fed, Native, Indigenous, University, NOAA, everybody, the smartest people in the world, to say, what is happening? Why do we think this is happening? And where are the research gaps that exist that we need to take action on? Well, I'm proud to say this Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act just put out their report like about 2 weeks ago. It is, I think, really exceptional. Excuse me. Hang on one sec. Sorry, I'm just taking a little water there. And it's pretty remarkable. Federal legislation doesn't normally go, pass a law and then get a report done all within inside 2 years on a really important issue. So the favor I'm asking you is to take a look at the report. It's not perfect, but like I said, when we put this legislation together, a lot of people were kind of hesitant. Now, hey, Senator, what are you trying to do here? What's the agenda here? And I told everybody who would listen, there's no agenda here. All we want to do, like Kevin said, is figure out what is going on. How do we address it from a research perspective? And what issues should we be focused on? The report's really good. Like I said, it brings in the smartest minds probably in the world as it relates to Alaska salmon. And I think it's going to be a template for future action, which is another reason why we really want all of you guys at KRSA, who are so smart on these issues and care deeply about them, like I do and my team, to take a hard look at it. I think Doug Vincent Lang, I don't know if Doug's there, but I think he's been pleased with the report. And as you guys know, there's a lot of times these issues can be very contentious. They still are contentious, but this is a really good start. So take a look. I think my team brought copies of the report, and we want to work with all of you on how to move forward. Like I said, this is an important step. It's not going to solve our problems, but as you guys know, the wisdom of understanding truly the issues, and this is a complex issue. Anyone who says it's just one issue, I would strongly encourage them to read the report. So that's a big topic I wanted to highlight for all of you, and hopefully you can take a look at this. And it would be good to have the KRSA team and scientists read it and get back to me and my team as we move forward. Another priority that I want to touch on, and again, a lot of these issues, we got ideas from you guys in our sport fish community, and then we said, all right, good idea, we're going to go take action. My philosophy is I don't like talking. I don't like saying, oh, I'm just going to introduce a bill and nothing's going to happen. I like doing stuff and then making it happen, like for real. So let me give you one that we recently got done. It took 2 attempts because it got into a bill a couple of years ago and then it got vetoed, not because of this legislation, but related legislation. And then we got it in another rider. But this is the recreational quota entity, the RQE, for the sport fishing community. And the idea here, which again, we got directly from our sport fish community on the Kenai, was that this entity will be able to purchase commercial halibut quota from the commercial directed fishery funded by taxing themselves. So what this does is it enables our sport industry to not just have the tension with the commercial guys, but if they're not fully using their quota, then for our sport industry to be able to use it and take it themselves. And we think this is going to help with the sustainable fishery, robust stock assessments, and keeping people working together. So that's happened. We got that done last year, and now it's being implemented. Another one that we're working on, again, a lot of you guys came to us on this, is that a number of you know that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been trying to ban the use of lead tackle in several national wildlife refuges. And as you guys know, many Alaskans depend on not only lead ammo in tackle for subsistence hunting and fishing, but they do that because the alternatives are often much more expensive and less effective. And we think banning lead tackle will deter fishing participation, and we don't see a big scientific basis for this. So again, working with all of you, I was an original co-sponsor on the Protecting Access for Hunters and Anglers Act, which will push back on this rule and make them come up with sound science for doing something along these lines. So stay tuned on that one. The next one, again, working with all of you that did pass, was my bill called the American Fisheries Advisory Committee Act. This goes to the issue of Salton Kennedy funding, which you guys and others receive. But what we saw, what you told us is that funding is being directed totally by federal agencies. No offense to NOAA and EPA and others, but they had started to carve out sport fishermen and other fishermen in terms of how to direct the funds. Wrong answer. These funds, which has been around for a long time, the Salton Kennedy bill, should be going to communities that have a direct impact on where the money goes. And it became essentially federal agencies saying, here's where we're going to direct the money. So my bill said, nope, our commercial and our sport fishing communities, they're going to have a big impact on where these millions of dollars of federal funding goes. That passed recently. We got that into law. So stand by. We want your input on where those federal funds go. Again, no offense to NOAA and other federal agencies, but we need the sport fishing community, the private Alaskans, not always federal agencies, that are directing that. And then just 2 more. One, which is, I think, and I know there's going to be a panel on this, but look, we always have to realize that in certain ways, Alaska can be under attack. And our fishing community, in my view, recently has now been put in the sights of some of these radical far left activist groups from the lower 48. The most recent one is the Wild Fish Conservancy, who are coming with a lot of money with these lawsuits and actions. Some of you may have followed the deceptive lawsuit, meritless in my view, that these guys put forward last year to shut down our small boat hook and line troll salmon fishery in Southeast. They almost won that. And my office led the amicus brief in the district court in the Ninth Circuit to say, no, this is based on faulty science. And we won that. Some of you may have seen the Ninth Circuit ruled in our favor just last Friday. So we were pretty excited about that. But these guys are not done yet. They have now moved forward with a petition to list the king salmon in the Gulf of Alaska as threatened or endangered. And again, we think this is meritless. I have been working very closely with the NIMS administrator, Janet Coit, to give her Alaska's views on this, and importantly, tell her, insist with her, that the state of Alaska Department of Fish and Game, who, no offense to NOAA, are the real experts on Alaskan salmon, be part of and a key element of the process. The ESA, as you know, is a blunt, one-size-fits-all instrument, and I think would inflict very significant harm on Alaskans, our economy, sport fishing, if they move forward with this. I've had many discussions with Janet Coit, but she did agree that Alaska Department of Fish and Game will be a critical component of the science that goes into them analyzing this. So I think that's going to be very, very important. And then finally, I'm really honored to be able to introduce the panel that we have with us, some of the nation's leading marine debris experts, Joel Johnson, who's the president of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, Susan Sherman, Marine Debris Foundation Executive Director, and Carrie Houtman, who is the Dow Director of Sustainability and Environment. They're going to have a great panel discussion. I'm looking forward to watching it live streaming here. But let me just give you a little background on how we got to this spot. You guys know the problem, but according to NOAA, 1.4 billion pounds of trash and plastics and garbage enter into our oceans every year. 1.4 billion with a B. And here's the thing. The vast majority, I think NOAA did a study, I think it's 60% or more, comes from 10 rivers in Asia and Africa. So this is actually an environmental issue that we can solve, because the point where this is happening is you can target it. Now, look, we're not perfect as a country, but the vast majority of the ocean debris and ocean plastics does not come from the United States. However, as you guys all know, so much of that ends up on our shores. We have more coastline than the rest of the country combined in Alaska, and this negatively impacts polluted oceans, ocean plastics, our sport fisheries, our coastal communities. So a number of years ago, I got together with one of my colleagues. He's actually a good friend of mine. He and I bonded over this legislation, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Now, those you know Sheldon Whitehouse, he is a very liberal senator, and I am not. But we all love our oceans, and we all know that this shouldn't be a partisan issue. So the two of us got busy. We passed our first bill called the Save Our Seas Act in 2018. And I was able to get President Trump quite motivated about this bill and this environmental issue and cleaning up our oceans. So we had a great signing ceremony in the Oval Office in 2018 to get the first Save Our Seas Act bill going. And then in 2020, building on the first Save Our Seas Act, we passed the Save Our Seas Act 2.0. President Trump signed that as well. Very excited about it. The Congressional Research Service called that the most comprehensive ocean cleanup legislation in the history of the United States. So a really good comprehensive bill that focuses on marine debris prevention and response and bolstering infrastructure to combat marine debris and ocean plastics. Again, it's a global issue, but it really impacts our fisheries, our sport fisheries, our state, our economy for that matter. And you've been out to some of these places in Alaska, particularly some of our remote islands. You go on the beach and it's just god awful, right? There's so much debris that comes over from Asia. So one of the elements of the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 was the establishment of the Marine Debris Foundation. Now, what we wanted to make sure that this legislation was about was to make sure that the way in which you try to address the ocean cleanup issues, that you're not just fully relying on the government. You're not saying, oh, federal government, you do this, you do that. To be honest, we designed this bill to say, we think the private sector is going to have a really big role to play here. Some of you have heard about this group, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. That's a Fortune 50 grouping, the top 50 companies in America. They've already set aside $1.5 billion to focus on this issue. So this issue unites Democrats, Republicans, business, environmental groups, conservatives, liberals. And what was really exciting is that this Marine Debris Foundation, that's part of our bill, is meant to be kind of a conduit of the private sector government involvement. The Marine Debris Foundation can accept government money, which it has some, but it can also accept private money and be a real focus for private sector solutions. Now, it's just got great potential. So as the author of this bill, I was really focused on making sure that foundation, when it got stood up, be headquartered where? In our great state, the state with the most coastline, the state that has most at risk with regard to ocean debris. The Marine Debris Foundation has a board with 13 people, including 2 Alaskans. Some of you know Jenny Eckhart. She's now the chair. And this has so much potential. So a couple of months ago, the board and NOAA announced that it was going to be headquartered in Alaska, in Juneau, with our great NOAA and university systems, UAF fisheries program. But here's the vision, you guys, and I think it's really exciting. Think about, Congress does not do many congressionally chartered foundations. We don't do them. And when we do, they're big deals. Think about the American Red Cross, the American Legion, the National Parks Foundation. Those are congressionally chartered foundations. The Congress of the United States does not do that often. This is one. And I think this could be, especially with its ability to accept private sector dollars, could make Alaska the center in the world for private sector and innovative solutions to marine debris. And that, in my view, is going to happen, especially under the leadership of Susan, who I know is going to talk to you guys, but it's really exciting. So we got a lot to do. Again, I'm really sorry that I'm not there. This is like one of my favorite events of the year. And hopefully I will be back there strong. You can see my voice is almost petered out here. But without further ado, I know we're going to have a good discussion on this. But like I said, we got a lot of challenges. There's no doubt. I know you're going to talk about a lot of them. Kevin mentioned some, but we're also making progress on working together on a lot of these. And we all want the same thing: clean oceans, healthy oceans, sustainable fisheries, strong salmon runs throughout our great state for everybody. And working together, and Krista, you guys have been so amazing on this for decades. We're going to be able to do it. So without further ado, I'm going to look forward to watching the marine debris panel. And thanks again, everybody. And I really apologize for not being there with you.
I got a red light, but we'll see if you guys' mics work.
I got a green light. I have a green light also.
Green light.
There we go. I got a red light. They don't want to moderate, so that makes sense. Oh, no, sure. Thanks again, Senator Sullivan, for that introduction to this panel. As you all can see, we're really blessed as Alaskans because under the weather Senator Sullivan, I'd take over the vast majority of the U.S. Senate any day. He fights incredibly hard for our state, and we're just blessed to have him. And thanks for setting us up here. Today's panel, as he said, is building off the idea of what public-private partnerships can do for marine debris. But we're going to start with another group. Joel Johnson is the president of the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, and he'll give us a bit of background on that and set up the panel from there. Joel?
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. And I want to thank the entire community for hosting us and having us and creating this opportunity to speak about marine debris and this sort of prolific problem here in America across all of our waters. My name is Joel Johnson. I'm the president and CEO of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our National Marine Sanctuaries, I'll give you the quick 101. So I have the fortune of working in partnership with NOAA to co-steward some 640,000 square miles of ocean and Great Lakes from the Florida Keys to Hawaii. There are no national marine sanctuaries in Alaska proper, just to be clear, but I'm here because I believe our national marine sanctuaries are living laboratories. They're great places that hold a lot of the solutions that can be transferable and scalable to other communities. National marine sanctuaries are basically significant areas of national importance. If anyone here has ever, for example, been to the Florida Keys and you've put a toe in the water in the Keys, you have been in a national marine sanctuary. Almost the entirety of Florida Keys is a national marine sanctuary. And under the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, it has certain opportunities for funding, unique opportunities to test different management strategies, as well as creating access opportunities for all diverse kinds of people. The interesting thing about these national marine sanctuaries, just like any coastline, is that they, of course, suffer from a pretty significant marine debris problem. And we're going to talk all about different types of marine debris, different types of solutions that have emerged that create opportunities for every community. And we're going to talk a little bit about the partnerships that it takes to pull off things like marine debris removal, both upstream at point sources like rivers and streams, and then downstream when we've got things floating in and coming in and clogging or polluting our shorelines. A quick example, the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, which is just down the road in Washington, we are working at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation in partnership with that sanctuary, as well as 4 tribal nations, including the Makah tribe, to remove an example of marine debris, which is sunken vessels from Nia Bay. And first of all, why would we do that? Well, especially when there's really good fishing off of some of those wrecks. The challenge with those wrecks is that they disintegrate over time. They leach out toxic substances. And what they also do is they prevent the Makah people from using their port for subsistence fishing. taking advantage of crabbing and fishing and so forth. And so by removing that marine debris, we're restoring that habitat, creating an opportunity for the people who live there, who grow up there, to continue their culture, their particular way of life. And I think that I want to stress that point, that marine debris can threaten our marine cultural way of life. You know, our fishing, both recreational and commercial, our subsistence fishing opportunities. And so we're doing this knowing that it's just a small project, 14 boats, also a bridge structure, but we wanted to set it up as an example of what can be done across the country in other ports and bays. And so our job at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation it services these 16 national marine sanctuaries and 2 national marine monuments, but it's really to set up a strong example of leadership. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank Senator Sullivan for his pioneering work on marine debris legislation, as well as Senator Murkowski, Representative Peltola, KRSA, and all of our sponsors who have been able to bring us together, Yamaha, Dow, as well as the National Marine Manufacturers Association. Their commitments to the Kenai River really also set an example, right? Just as all of your commitments are to the Kenai River Sportfishing Association. It sets an example for what we can do in so many other places. So I'm very fortunate to be on this panel with some great advocates for marine debris removal, and I'm going to pass the mic over to them so that they can introduce themselves and we can get started.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's good to be here. Came in yesterday from Michigan, so another one of our great freshwater ecosystem states. I've had the privilege for some 28 years to work for the Dow Chemical Company, and I think a lot of you probably don't even know that you use the products that we make every day. So Dow is a broad-based chemical provider, producer. We have manufacturing assets in 104 plants worldwide, and we do business in about 170 countries. And so when we think about the importance of chemistry and the importance of the technology and the innovation that our company has brought to the market for some 127 years and counting, we understand the global nature of a challenge like marine debris. We also, in full transparency, not only make the chemicals and the materials that go into your shampoo and your personal care products and your paints. We make the polyurethane foams that you sit on in your cars and in your homes and in your mattresses. But we also make plastic. And while I think it is remarkable that plastics brings a lot of different opinions and a lot of different sentiment to the table, what I think is almost without debate, and I say because there's always debate about something, but almost without debate, is the fact that plastic is so important to our quality of life and the way that we live in a modern society. What we need to do, however, is to be much more responsible and much more efficient with the way that plastic ends up in the environment. And so when I say I've had the privilege of working for this company for 28 years, I mean that truly. I've spent about half of my career in sustainability and environment, health, and safety, ensuring that our products are well used and increasingly now well disposed of and reused. But also have spent about half of my career in government affairs and public policy. And so when we have the opportunity to partner with an elected official like Senator Sullivan and Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Murkowski, Senator Murkowski, it is such a refreshing and positive change for us to be able to engage with individuals who understand the challenge, who understand the necessity of these kinds of materials in our daily life, but who also see the possibilities for being better about environmental stewardship, being better about habitat conservation. And so over the last 2 years or so, I've had the privilege of leading our enterprise circularity strategy with a great team of folks in our plastics business and then across our other business units as well. But also about 90 days ago or so, we made public a first for the company, which is a freshwater stewardship strategy for Dow, as well as a biodiversity strategy and targets associated with those over the next 25 years. So it is a great privilege to be here, be a 5-year sponsor of KRSA, understanding what you all have already done in that freshwater conservation and marine debris space, but also the possibilities of great partners like yours and like my esteemed panelists here, in order for us to continue to learn, bring great technologies to the conversation, and frankly put in place the partnerships that will be necessary in order to advance a global solution for a topic that's as challenging and as impactful as marine debris.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm Susan Sherman with the Marine Debris Foundation, and I am responsible for all of the debris that I left on your chairs. So thanks for your attention. Shannon, thank you for the invitation and for pulling us all together. And Senator Sullivan, I'm so sorry you're not here in person for many reasons, but I did want to have the opportunity to thank you again in person for your tremendous support of not only the Marine Debris Foundation, but of ocean conservation, and for really advocating for the people and the resources in Alaska. As the Senator mentioned, the Marine Debris Foundation is very happy that we do have a headquarters here in Alaska in Juneau. I am located in Virginia and back and forth to Alaska. As we scale the organization, and I'll talk to you a bit about what this organization really looks like now and what the potential is, we will have presence full-time in Alaska, which we're very much looking forward to. So as the Senator said, so this organization was conceived of as a public-private partnership. And NOAA is the federal agency, although other federal agencies work on marine debris. NOAA is the federal agency that has the lead office of marine debris. And so that office, in talking with a congressional delegation, realized that there are limitations, obviously, to what the federal government can do in Alaska and across the United States and internationally to address marine debris all the way up the scale from removal to prevention. So the federal government can put a lot of money into removal, which is very important, and we continually, right, as soon as you take it out, there's more to be taken out. But what the federal government can't do is a few things. They can't really be risky financially. They can't be innovative in the way that they fund opportunities to really address the prevention, the removal, and the reduction of marine debris, the way the private sector can, right? The private sector is innovative. It's technologically savvy. There are different financing schemes that the private sector that an organization like ours can leverage that the federal government just can't. Moreover, NOAA pours tens and hundreds of millions of dollars every year of federal funding into really important marine debris related programs. But the nature of federal grants is such that it does not make sense for them from an efficiency standpoint to issue grants at really under $250,000. That means that there are thousands of organizations and entities and academic institutions and startups that could really do a lot of good with a $100,000 grant, with a $20,000 grant. And it's sitting up there in NOAA, but they can't pull it down. We can pull it down. So we can pull down federal funding because we are in partnership with the federal agency. We can pull down federal funding and make many more grants to many more entities doing the work on the ground that NOAA just can't get to. And we can also, there's opportunities for us to then pull down matching federal funds. So raise a dollar for many of you in the room, we have the opportunity often to match that with a federal dollar. So it just automatically multiplies the impact of the private sector. So that in essence was the conceptual design of the Marine Debris Foundation. And again, if you're familiar with the National Park Foundation, it's a similar construct, or NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, is the partner to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So marine debris is a vast topic. When I told my friends that I was accepting this job, and they said, so you're going to have that figured out by Wednesday, right? How to solve this issue? And I said, Thursday, maybe Thursday. But what we do is, it's lovely that you can call me an expert all you want, but I think what the Marine Debris Foundation and perhaps others on this panel are called to do is find the experts. Right? We are the conveners. We are the connectors. We have the privilege of sitting in the seats that we do with our hands into the communities to learn from each other, learn from you in the room, learn from others across the country, around the world that are doing the work that we need to figure out what's working, what's scalable and replicable, what's data-driven. What can we take some risks on in order to really drive innovation and move the needle a lot faster than it's been moving? And how can we together combine private resources, public resources, ingenuity, brain trust in order to really get a hold and a handle on marine debris?
Thank you for that introduction, you three. I think the place I'd like to go next is diving a little deeper into what makes those successful collaborations. Senator Sullivan has kind of challenged us as KRSA and as Alaskans to think about how to support the stand-up of the Marine Debris Foundation here in Alaska. And Carrie, Joel, you have a lot of experience seeing these partnerships develop in other states and in other parts of the world. So I'd ask you to kind of kick off a little bit of that, and hopefully we can come back to Susan, with a little bit deeper into how then this group can follow up and start to build that partnership with you.
That's great. So I'll jump in real quick with an example of I think a successful partnership that is rooted in opportunity. So in one of our national marine sanctuaries, I'll go back to Florida, for example, Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuaries. We have a unique program in partnership with NOAA called Goal Clean Seas. And it is a interesting program that brings the public into the process of managing and stewarding the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, which is beloved by people all over the Southeast, from Pennsylvania to Georgia to North Carolina, who go there every summer. And they go there to fish, they go there to swim, be with the family, and a lot of people go there to dive. And so this might be interesting to Kevin. So we've partnered with local dive operators who are taking out these tourists in the Florida Keys to these beautiful reefs along the Keys. And we train them in marine debris removal. So we tell them and what trash looks like, what is a derelict fishing gear look like, what does the impact look like on the corals, and we give them a bit of training on how to carefully remove that without disturbing and or destroying, damaging those important corals. And then we take them on a dive trip, and they remove that trash, and they have a great experience because many of them are repeat divers, and they want to feel like they're part of giving back to the resource that they care about. So it's a wonderful partnership because it also engages those local businesses, those dive operators in the recreational tourism industry, and it gets them involved in the process. And so it's a really fun partnership. And again, it can't happen everywhere. It's not necessarily fully scalable, but it shows you that the innovation and the ideas are possible. And then working with, of course, the state of Florida and other partners, we're able to expand it. And I'd have a note here because I wanted to read just how many pounds of debris have been removed. So over 476,000 pounds since 2018, which is astonishing, and some 48,000 volunteer hours. It's pretty remarkable. And we talk about public-private partnerships, and it's a critical aspect of how you can achieve success. But the scale comes from engaging the communities. It comes from engaging people who take these ideas and they take them home with them. They take them to other organizations and NGOs who have similar problems with issues in their fisheries, in their communities, around their waterways. And it absolutely is a way to, of course, engage the next generation of stewards so that we are building on our legacy and hopefully creating better habits and overall environmental literacy. So there's a really good example of a partnership in the Keys that I could share with you, and I'm sure we can talk about some others.
Yeah, so let me tackle the question in maybe a little bit of a different way. When Dow thinks about partnerships, and we partner with companies, we partner with academia, with policymakers, with nonprofits, with community groups, we partner with anyone who is a willing partner for us. But what does that mean to me? So if I were to give you a little bit of a sense of our cookbook in looking for a partner, I would say a couple things. First, that they have a similar purpose, but a very different idea about how to go about it. And we look for partners with that similar purpose because that is the way that you get early alignment on what the challenge really is and what you're trying to actually accomplish. But we don't necessarily want to find 15 other partners who would all solve it the same way we do, or that we would as an engineering and an innovation company. I'm most interested in a nonprofit or an academic partner or a policymaker who approaches the solution in a vastly different way than I would think about, because I believe that that is the way that you get to the scalable and replicatable solutions that we need in the marine debris space. So I think the first one, that first idea is really important for us, which is common purpose, different approach. The second part of my cookbook when I'm looking for partnerships on sustainability or stewardship or conservation is to find an organization or a partner who is willing to put progress over perfection. So we could sit as a group or even as a small army and try and engineer the perfect solution for marine debris or the perfect solution for recycling technology, what have you. But it may take us a decade. And the time to take action is yesterday, but the next best time to take action is today. Recognizing that the solution may not be perfect, but that we can learn a lot by stepping down the path. And I think that leads me to the third kind of ideal that I look for in a partner, which is be willing to fail and succeed fast, so that we can learn quickly and move forward. But find a partner who is more willing about taking action than they are about taking credit. And I think that's been a really significant learning for our company over the last several years. We are a for-profit enterprise. We are a Fortune 50 company. And so this idea about taking action and don't worry about taking credit necessarily is a little tough, to be quite frank, right? It's maybe a tough sell. But what we've noticed is that there is so much good to be found and progress to be gained. I think it was President Reagan who said, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And I try and take that to heart when I'm trying to find partners. And I'll give you just a quick example. We are the founding partner of a small entity called Rivers Are Life. And they're a multimedia production company who is conservation and stewardship based. And they look to tell the story about what we call river heroes. And these are individuals who have figured out a way to make significant impact in their watersheds, in their river systems, without the help necessarily of government or of big sponsors or of big bankrolls. They do it because they are passionate about it and they feel a commitment to improving the watershed for the next generation. And Rivers Are Life finds these individuals and tells their story in a way that is so compelling and so so beautifully done. I think some of you may have seen the piece that Rivers Our Life did on the Kings of the Kenai with Bob Penny and his story and the story of this organization. If you haven't, check it out. They've done another one, which is Keepers of the North, which talks about the effort to remove marine debris from your coastline with your partners, with Dow, with Pixero, with other companies who have come alongside an effort that was already underway by some pretty remarkable individuals. So what our organization, what my company is trying to do is to find those river heroes through the Rivers Our Life platform, help them tell their story, help them scale their operation in a way that they know makes sense, because what we know could be scalable on the Mississippi River is not necessarily replicable for the Nile or the Amazon or another big river system or your shoreline. So I think when you don't care who gets the credit, when it's not about taking credit but taking action, I think you can really make some remarkable gains. And they feel like one step at a time, but you can really make some remarkable gains if you can put aside some of those other pieces, find partners who shared purpose, different approach, willing to fail fast, willing to take action, put perfection aside. And when you let go of your desire or your organization's need to take credit, it is absolutely astonishing what you can accomplish.
Just being cut off left and right. I just wanted to say thank you for that, Carrie. That's kind of a good description of Alaskans trying to work together to get through a winter. Just creative, working together, and not worrying about credit. And want to say, Susan, you've got a lot of people in the room, and a lot of special shout out to our state legislators that are here that really do a lot of work for our state without getting, and they do it because they want to and because they love Alaska, not for the credit, and the staff that are here too on behalf of the delegation. A lot of people in the room. Carrie, that was a really great way to look at being innovative. And Susan, I'll pass you the mic back to give, oh, you got one, a little bit more about how, as the Marine Debris Foundation stands up, people in Alaska can think about the different scales to engage with you.
Sure, thank you. So I think the obvious answer is be responsible for your own stuff, right? If you're out fishing, just take care of your own stuff, recycle it, dispose of it appropriately. If the facilities that you use don't have recycling opportunities, talk to me. I can put you in touch either with agencies or organizations that are funding such facilities. And then, of course, as a nonprofit CEO sitting on stage with another nonprofit CEO, I would not be doing my job if I didn't say the other obvious way is to support the work that we're doing, right? So my organization, we are young. We need to scale quickly and rapidly so that we can put a butt in a seat in that office in Juneau. And we can have staff around the country that are working with you, all of you, and with state agencies and local agencies and our nonprofit partners. So to give you an example, so if I find this work fascinating, the more that I dig into marine debris across the spectrum, I think I have to stop talking with my hands, across the spectrum from the largest of the abandoned and derelict vessels to the midstream single-use plastics that we're also familiar with that are mucking up our waterways, to the microplastics and nanoplastics that are confounding and difficult, and we still don't understand a lot about them, but we need to really quickly. So the more I dig deeper into this work, the more dynamic and fascinating it is. And there is virtually no sector, I think, in the tech world, in the conservation world, in the sporting industry that is not influenced and can impact marine debris and the reduction and removal and prevention of marine debris. So if you would choose today, for instance, to use that QR code at the bottom of that rack card and support the Marine Debris Foundation. So we are right now investing in a huge array of projects, mostly right now domestic, but a few international. And those range from removal projects, right? So beach cleanups. My board and I were in Alaska. We were in Sitka a couple of months ago. We participated with partners on the ground, Ocean Conservancy, Sitka Sound Science Center. We did a cleanup on Bjork Island in Sitka Sound. There are thousands of cleanups going on around the world all the time. So you can be part of that with us. Moving more upstream, we are funding projects that are marine debris prevention receptacles in rivers and oceanfront properties across the country. We are involved in education and outreach, right? All of this work, all of the hardscape that we put into place, all of the policy work that we can engage in really doesn't mean much if we are not talking to our kids, educating the next generation of fishermen and policymakers and decision makers and parents, right? We know any kind of big social change, paradigm shift has to start young. And so we're working with outreach and education, both in the public sector and in schools. We're funding one group right now in Maine that is working with college campuses across the US on working with food service to ultimately eliminate single-use plastics from their campuses. It's huge, really, if you think about the impact. And so what that project is doing is not only the immediate elimination of what will ultimately, some of it will become marine debris, but they are empowering college students. This is a student-run organization, and they've got chapters across the country. So they're empowering students on how to stand up an organization like this, how to really make change, what are the data that are necessary to convince and work with college campuses and their concessioners. And the ripple effect is pretty significant. So those and 100 other examples of the projects that we're engaged in is how you can make a change. You can work with us to make a change. You are out there in the community, you see the impacts, you see the opportunities. And as I think we were all saying, you know, in this past half hour, we're here to listen to you, we're here to respond, and we're here to pull all of the resources together. Government has a role to play, we have a role to play in the nonprofit sector, private sector, as citizens have a role to play, industry has a role to play. And if you are interested and passionate about this topic as it plays into your recreational and your personal and your professional lives, we can be a resource for you to put your concerns into action.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you again to Senator Sullivan and Senator Whitehouse for really taking this on, the legislation. It's always inspiring to see legislation move from the words on the page into actually the action on the ground. And that's thanks to Joel, your work at the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, Susan, what you're standing up, and Carrie, legislation doesn't happen without broad community support. And so I know Dow was a big supporter of Save Our Seas. Thank you for supporting that bipartisan work, and really look forward to what this does for Alaska. I think the question I'd like to end on, though, Joel, is we are about 2/3 of the way through our season up here. What is the marine sanctuary that some of us thinking about January or February, where should we go in the lower 48?
That's I don't know. That's a tough question. I'm not supposed to have any favorites. And I don't know. I guess I will just say, God, lower 48. I mean, if you're going to go for, you might as well go for sun. So maybe Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary off the California coast.
Great. Look forward to learning about more. Everyone, thank you for, thank the panel, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to have Danny Everson Evanson, and I've got, let's see, Danny, you're going to come on up, and we've got Kevin Delaney's going to come up and moderate this one.
Testing 1, 2. Well, welcome back. So Danny Evanson's here to talk about the ESA petition, potential listing, the science for and against it, and the intended and unintended consequences. A gentleman who's not here today is one of my best friends in life. It's Commissioner of Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Doug Vincent Lang. And I want to tell you that there is no one on the planet more prepared to lead Alaska in this effort than Doug Vincent Lang. He'll be here tomorrow. When he comes, he'll give of himself to talk to each and every one of you and everybody else at the Classic. And I urge you to take advantage of that. Another person I see in the crowd over here is Israel Payton, and he's the director of the Division of Sport Fish in Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And you know me, I want to tell a story, but I've known Israel since he was born. His family lived in a trapper cabin up in the Hayes River, way north in the Susitna drainage. And today he's the director of the Division of Sport Fish, and he's my friend. So you'll see him. Danny, I'm going to give it to you now in your capable hands. You and I have had a chance to talk a little bit about some of the interests that I want to hear about, and I'm sure you got a lot more. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. I think you teed me up quite well with your opening remarks, as did Senator Sullivan. I'm Danny Evanson. I'm a policy advisor with the Department of Fish and Game. I've been doing contentious salmon issues for, about almost 30 years of my career. And I've been with the department since about 2005. The commissioner apologizes that he couldn't be here for this today, so you're stuck with me. But I swear I'm going to try and muster up some of his passion for this issue. And believe me, he is very passionate about this issue. So on January 11th, NMFS, the National Marine Fisheries Service, received a petition to list all Gulf of Alaska Chinook salmon as threatened or endangered species under the Endangered Species Act, or ESA. This is a massive area. That includes all Chinook that spawn from Ketchikan to beyond Dutch Harbor. It includes Southeast Alaska, Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, Kodiak, the Alaska Peninsula. And as Senator Sullivan had mentioned, this petition was filed by the Wild Fish Conservancy, an outside environmental group. I don't know if they've even been to Alaska. And they're the same group that sued NMFS to shut down the Southeast Alaska commercial troll hook and line fishery. And we did just win a victory, I'm pleased to say, last week in the Ninth Circuit Court, and that fishery gets to remain open. But the Wild Fish Conservancy clearly did not get what they wanted, and so they're attacking Alaska. They're attacking us on multiple fronts. They have launched campaigns to attack our seafood markets, and now we have this petition to list everything in the Gulf of Alaska under the ESA. So NMFS issued what's called a positive 90-day finding. That was in late May this year. The positive finding indicates that NMFS believes the petition provides substantial information that an ESA listing for these stocks may be warranted. Implicit in that is that they also believe that the state might not be doing such a great job. This positive finding kicks off a public comment period and also starts a 12-month status review of the species under the ESA. And the results of that status review will be a decision on whether to list any or all Gulf of Alaska Chinook stocks as threatened or endangered under the ESA. If they're listed, it transitions management from state to federal control. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I know we have limited time. So I'd like to briefly cover what the ESA is and what it does for those of you who are not familiar. I want to be really clear on what the state's position is on it, and briefly cover what the impacts of a listing to Alaska are likely to be. So first, starting off with a couple of definitions, the boring stuff. The purpose of the ESA is straightforward. It's to recover species that are threatened with extinction and not let them go extinct. And it's implemented by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for terrestrial and freshwater species, and for nymphs, for marine mammals, and for anadromous species like salmon. There are a couple exceptions in there. An endangered species is a species that is in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range. And the best example, or an example of that we have in Alaska is Cook Inlet beluga. A threatened species that's a little bit less is likely to become an endangered species within the quote unquote foreseeable future throughout all or a significant portion of its range. And examples in Alaska are species like wood bison and polar bears, and one of the groups of northern sea otters and Steller's eider. We are fortunate. We have no listed fish species in this state, and we'd like to keep it that way. So the state's position, as a general rule, the state of Alaska supports listing of species. We're not anti-ESA. We just support listing of species that are critically imperiled and at risk of extinction in the immediate future. An example of that might be North Pacific right whales. Our concerns revolve around the question of what constitutes critically imperiled and requires listing, and how much federal oversight is really necessary to recover a species. Let me be clear. Gulf of Alaska Chinook salmon are not imperiled, much less critically or chronically imperiled. The state of Alaska does not believe that the ESA is the correct tool to address a downturn in Chinook abundance. And that was echoed by Senator Sullivan earlier today, and by Senator Murkowski, and we've had great support from the congressional delegation. So let's take a look at the ESA listing criteria. There are 5 threats that are in Section 4A1 of the ESA, and yes, I'm learning those numbers on the fly, chapter and verse. And these are the criteria that NIMS will use to evaluate whether an ESA listing is warranted. Starting with escapement, which isn't really one of the threats, that's one of 2 primary reasons NIMS cited as their justification for issuing a positive 90-day finding. They said missed escapement goals in recent years is a problem. Now, the state of Alaska manages all salmon stocks based on the sustained yield principle. That's enshrined in our state constitution, and it's in state statute. Escapement goals are based on sustained yield, and typically maximum sustained yield. This is not a metric of abundance to maintain a viable population. It is not a metric of risk of extinction. In other words, failing to meet an escapement goal is not evidence that stocks are at risk of extinction. True, we do have a downward trend in several Chinook stocks. It's not a good look, and we are concerned throughout the Gulf of Alaska, but they're not at critically low levels where the long-term viability of any stock is imperiled, and they certainly aren't chronically low. There is a threat one of the 5 threats is inadequate regulatory controls. And I think the people in this room, know that the state does have adequate regulatory controls to manage for sustained yield and conservation of our stocks. When salmon abundance falls below our yield-based goals, we take action. We are required to take action in state statute. Many fisheries have been reduced or closed altogether in response to declines in Chinook abundance. And in some cases, non-target fisheries have been restricted. Look at sockeye fisheries near here to protect wild Chinook. And anyone who fishes the Kenai is painfully aware of this. Alaskans endure short-term closures to ensure the long-term health and productivity of salmon stocks. That we are willing to and regularly close fisheries to protect yield is a sign of good management and is not a sign that our stocks are imperiled. And the status of each stock is assessed triennially. If these harvests are consistently below our expectations, the Alaska Board of Fish designates a stock of concern and establishes an action plan that has even more restrictions. And Chinook stocks are not at risk of extinction because they're a stock of concern. A failure to provide for yield does not mean risk of extinction now or in the foreseeable future. Another one of the threats deals with overharvest. This is a tricky one to get at because harvest occurs throughout the Gulf of Alaska in commercial, sport, subsistence, personal use fisheries. It can happen in target fisheries, that is fisheries that are actually targeting Chinook, and non-target fisheries. This can be incidental or bycatch. And our marine water fisheries tend to harvest a mixture of stocks, some from inside the area and some from outside the area. So this is a tricky one to get at, but there's no evidence at this point that these stocks are being overharvested. The petition itself didn't provide any evidence. They just used some broad statements. And when it came to sport fisheries, they actually said, well, sport fish harvest was high in 2005 and 2006, but low in 2021. And that's evidence of overfishing. That's absurd. I mean, that is absolutely absurd. Not to mention, your harvest is relative to your abundance. And that was a COVID year. We know that the charter sector was really hurting because we didn't have the same tourism up in Alaska. So this is the type of stuff they're including in this petition that NIMS is saying yes to. Habitat, that's another threat. Contrary to the petition's broad assertions that our habitat is being destroyed at a high rate by logging, mining, and other development, habitat in Alaska is relatively intact and in most cases pristine. The petitioners provided no evidence of this and appeared to simply have cut and pasted from some Pacific Northwest issues without considering data. Disease and predation are another one. How am I doing on time? I could skip over those if needed. Keep going. All right. Petition asserted that diseases originating in hatcheries have been transmitted to wild populations, and it's driving mortality at all life stages. This is patently false. Again, it appears to be written from that Pacific Northwest lens, as most of the practices listed as concerning don't occur up here in Alaska. There has been no evidence that disease has negatively affected the viability of any wild or cultured Chinook salmon stocks in the Gulf. And we have a statewide health pathology program that checks for disease and safeguards Alaska fish. So we're regularly monitoring these things. Predation. Predation occurs naturally in both freshwater from invasive northern pike, and we have the aggressive eradication program to deal with that, and in marine waters. It is a known cause of natural mortality of any salmon. However, we really don't have direct evidence in marine waters that predatory impacts are acting outside of the norm in ecosystem dynamics. And certainly we do not have evidence that they're imperiling the long-term existence of Gulf of Alaska Chinook pops. And the last threat is the other and natural and man-made factors. And those are things like climate change. Climate change is perhaps the most concerning of all of these threats to us, but not because we think it is an extinction risk problem for Chinook. We're worried because how nymphs may assess climate change, where climate change can have both benefits to salmon, such as opening up new habitat from glacial retreat, and impacts, which, sometimes there's less water in streams or the stream temperature is warmer. The state is very concerned that nymphs will apply a climate change model to Chinook abundance trends and make inappropriate extrapolations out to the turn of the century. When you think about it, if you apply a climate change model with a downward trend to any species with a downward trend, you could come up with at risk of extinction in the foreseeable future. So again, this particular issue out of all of them has us the most concerned. Other issues that fall under this category that I'm not going to go into detail on for time constraints are things like marine competition and hatchery production. So NIMS issued this positive 90-day finding, but should they have? NIMS's own guidance on responding to petitions, which they updated recently in 2021, define substantial scientific or commercial information as the amount of information that would lead a reasonable person to conclude that the petition action may be warranted. This is known as the reasonable person standard, and it's a low bar. And as Commissioner Vincent Lang likes to say, I'm a reasonable person, and I don't believe that. So setting aside whether you think Commissioner Vincent Lang is actually reasonable, there's a lot of us. And there are a lot of comments in the public record from Northwest Indian Fish Commission, from tribal comments, from Tlingit and Haida, from Alaska Environmental Group, from fishing groups that also don't believe this is reasonable. NIMS's guidance also states that the petition should provide complete balanced representation of the relevant facts, including information that may contradict claims in the petition. But yet, by their own admission in the 90-day finding, they identified numerous factual errors, omissions, incomplete references, unsupported assertions, and conclusions within the petition. Indeed, more was wrong in this petition that was actually correct. Yet they said yes. They said yes to the Wild Fish Conservancy. We, the state, think this was a horrible decision. We believe that NIMS made a mistake on issuing the positive 90-day finding and didn't do a proper assessment of what a reasonable person with some knowledge on an issue would come up with. NIMS shouldn't have even accepted the petition in the first place. Again, more was wrong than correct in the petition. If it is okay for petitioners to throw spaghetti at the wall and hope something sticks, and our comments are probably over 200 pages. We hope to have those submitted soon in advance of the comment deadline, and we'll share those with the public. The next steps in the process for NIMS is this 12-month status review. Now, the clock started ticking on that the day the petition was submitted. That was January 11th, so not a lot of time left. We wrote a letter, Fish and Game, requesting that state experts be included on that status review team. Then it shouldn't be all federal because we're the ones with the expertise, folks like Kevin. And so we did get 2 on, and that request was granted, which is great, but we are non-voting members and we can't write a minority opinion. At any rate, we are giving it our all. And the first step in that process is to delineate the listable units, which is a critical step in process. And then once those are in place, they do viability analyses. What happens if we end up with a listing of one or more of these listable units? What would that mean for Alaska? I'm just going to do broad strokes until Kevin cuts me off. Species management shifts from state to federal control and the habitats they occupy. This has the potential to affect just about every fishery in the Gulf of Alaska, even those that don't target Chinook. If you have a potential to intercept Chinook, it's going to affect that fishery. Lots of added complexity, lots of regulatory hurdles, lots of additional requirements, and they're going to designate critical habitat, which are specific areas that contain physical or biological features essential for conservation. This adds regulatory hurdles for development projects that use federal dollars or already need a federal permit. It increases project timelines, costs, and adds constraints. And as an example, let's say you wanted to build a project, could be as small as, we want a new public access boat launch, and we're going to use DJ dollars for that. Well, now we have to go through a whole additional permit process just to put in a boat launch. So in closing, I'd like to just say a few things here. We recognize things are not rosy for Chinook right now. The state is taking aggressive action to protect these stocks, some of which are very painful for Alaskans. And we're doing this to ensure that when ocean conditions become more favorable, we can have healthy and robust fisheries. It's an investment in the future. A listing under the ESA is just going to add layers of regulation and bureaucracy that won't help the situation and will just ensure that we, Alaskans, will not be able to reap the benefits from painful fishery restrictions now when productivity rebounds. I, for one, take on a lot of these hot button issues on behalf of the state. And I've been told that I am the purveyor of doom and gloom. People want away from me, like conversations aren't exactly uplifting. But I'd like to leave you with some positive thoughts here, some parting thoughts. If there is one silver lining I could point out in all of this, I would say it's unity. It is unity among Alaskans pushing back on an outside attack on our fisheries, on our way of life. This issue has unified stakeholders from across the spectrum: commercial fishing groups, sport fishing groups, subsistence, tribes. There's several tribal comments in the public comment record. The RDC, Economic Development Councils, Alaska environmental groups are all unified on this issue. I have not seen, when was the last time we've seen everybody unified on a natural resource issue, Kevin, or a fisheries issue? Probably not since statehood, when we united to take over management of our fisheries in the first place. The state firmly believes that ESA listing of Chinook is unnecessary, unwarranted, and are going to throw everything we have at this to fight to keep our hard-fought rights to manage our natural resources. Make no mistake here, we are under attack, and your fishing game stands ready to fight alongside you.
There will be a couple questions. I'd just like to take a moment here. There's a couple other individuals in the audience. The former chairman of the Board of Fisheries, Marit Carlson Van Dort, is over here. Kurt Chamber. Oh, yeah, a round of applause for Marit would be. The load these people carry as members of our Board of Fish is incredible. And our Board of Fish process is one of the most objective, participatory, and transparent of any regulatory process in the United States. And one thing I'm going to come back to a couple of questions, but Danny did such a good job that it brought a couple other things to my memory. One is our Constitution, our state Constitution. You know, we're one of the last states. Our Constitution had, in forming it, we had the ability to take a look. And as Danny said, sustainability is in there for the maximum benefit of the people of Alaska. And for decades, it's been interpreted to mean shoot for maximum sustained yield, which is a target so far above endangered that the two don't even belong in the same chapter. If the lights in my eyes over here, so I'm not sure, but I think our Congresswoman, Mary Peltola, is just come in, and Mary, thank you very much. I was a member of the bycatch task force, and I know that's a real passionate issue on your plate. And I want to thank you for taking that sincere interest, and look forward to your closing comments. Another thing that I couldn't help thinking, listening to Danny, that I want to relate to you, and that's the fundamental difference between the people at Alaska Department of Fish and Game and, I'm going to say it, people in the federal process. Our people live in the communities that are affected by our decisions, and they have their hands directly on the control. You're looking at a person here that is like 1 degree of separation away from closing king salmon fishing for 7 years on the Yukon River. Before Danny came to this, she was in charge of trying to develop selective harvest strategies for Chinook salmon on the Yukon. I already gave you my goofy history, but each and every member of our Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and more importantly, probably than any other, is Doug Vincent Lang, the commissioner, has a story of coming up from the mud with hip boots on to where they are today, in addition to their technical expertise gained through college, masters, and whatever. These people have had experience with their hands on the controls. They've made mistakes. They've suffered the consequences of making mistakes. They stand up before our Alaska Board of Fisheries and our fisheries participants. And before I go back to Danny with a question, I just want to let you know that if there's any entity out there capable of managing through periods of low abundance and turbidity, it's the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. We got this. So Danny, as I told you before, that I was interested in the best argument that one could have for a warranted finding, and then the best argument against it. You've really covered those two things extremely well. And I guess I'd just like you to go back and reflect one more time on the intended and unintended consequences of a finding of warranted.
Thanks for the we'll trade. Excellent. Technology is not my strong suit. Thanks for the question, Kevin. If we would be so unlucky to get a listing in one or more what they call evolutionarily significant units, we would see a transfer from state management to federal management. Like I said, it would affect just about every fishery in the Gulf of Alaska, in-river fisheries, marine fisheries. And really, you want to look down south to see how this unfolded, where they have listed species, to see what happened, to yield clues of what likely might happen here. Well, when the feds took over management, they switched from escapement-based management to exploitation rate-based management. So this system that we are world renowned for might go away. And so NIMS has set up these ceiling exploitation rates that you cannot go above. And the way that works is, in this exploitation rate, we'd have to collect more data, but anywhere Kenai fish get caught are part of that limit. So if they get caught in South Peninsula fisheries or in Kodiak sport or commercial fisheries near Kodiak, all of that goes in to that limit. And oftentimes the people who pay the biggest penalty in that system are the in-river users, because you're not fishing a mixed stock. If you're fishing inside the Kenai, every fish you catch is a Kenai fish. The other thing is our in-season management program would probably go away. That's another thing we're world renowned for. We're extremely adaptable and flexible. We manage based on the data we're seeing. We start out with a preseason forecast, and if that's not coming in well, we reduce fisheries. If the run's coming in great, we can offer more opportunity to fish for Alaskans. The system down south is preseason. You set these preseason limits. NIMS has control of what your allowable catch are, what open areas are, all of that. States can submit harvest management plans, but they have to go through NIMS's review. They get a biological opinion, a NEPA analysis, an incidental take permit, layers and layers and layers. So lots of complexity, but the state would not have the authority to increase a fishery in season on its own if we were seeing good abundance. So that would go away. It would require NIMS's approval and a demonstration of no net impact. Other things that have happened down south, they've actually, it incentivized, ironically, incentivized hatchery production, because hatchery fish missing an adipose fin, are free from the ESU limits. So we saw an increase of hatchery production because you could have sport, catch, and release fisheries. And it was a way to have fisheries in light of ESA concerns. So we'd see additional restrictions, additional requirements, additional permits, regulatory hurdles, lots of complexity. Across the board, I would expect additional requirements such as catch sampling throughout the Gulf of Alaska, different catch monitoring. I'd probably have to write a report to NIMS every year on top of it. So, it would change a lot of things. And then there's the critical habitat piece, and that would add costs to anybody doing a project and delay timelines.
We're going to leave it at that. Danny, you're a treasure. Thank you very much for being here. We're going to hand it back to the real moderator now.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to ask Kurt, John, and Larry to come on up now. This next panel is another effort to explore innovative partnerships where federal government and stakeholders work together to deal with difficult issues at time, and really appreciate this group coming together and making the trip. So what I'd like to do is start off with Larry, who's the Pacific Fisheries Policy Director for the American Sport Fishing Association. Sounds like an amazing job, Larry. What I'd ask him to do is give a little bit of context about the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and from a sport fishing perspective, how it's been used to deal with both the issues and some of the opportunities that have been taken advantage of in the Pacific Northwest. So Larry, I'll let you introduce yourself and dive in.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Honored to be here. Larry Phillips. I cover Pacific fisheries policy issues for the American Sport Fishing Association. We are a member trade organization that represents the nation's sport fishing manufacturers and allied trades, several of who sponsored this event, so we appreciate their support. Prior to coming on with ASA, I spent 25 years as a salmon manager with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and during that 25 years, there wasn't many more controversial conversations. Well, the Endangered Species Act, as we heard from our previous presentation, but then the management of marine mammals under the current regulatory process that we have. In 1972, the Marine Mammal Protection Act was signed by President Nixon, and at that time there were approximately 75,000 California sea lions on the West Coast. There were no species of salmon listed in the Northwest under the Endangered Species Act, and things were moving along in a challenging pace. But in 1991, that changed with the sockeye being listed under the Endangered Species Act. In the years following, 12 more species were listed under the Endangered Species Act. And during that same time, California sea lion populations increased to about 300,000, where they're currently at, plus or minus. California sea lions were historically did not occur in the Columbia River, but they started showing up in the late 90s and early 2000s. that problem continued to get worse. And in the early 2000s, we started seeing significant numbers of California sea lions and stellar sea lions later that showed up to prey on returning salmon. The Bonneville Power Administration conducts a survey every year to estimate predation in and around the Bonneville Dam. And the most recent estimates of predation are for spring Chinook alone are in the 40% of the return annually. In 2008, the states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and the Northwest Treaty Tribes were successful in petitioning NOAA Fisheries and Congress to amend the Marine Mammal Protection Act that resulted in a removal program. And this is a monumental task, as you can imagine. The program is currently in its 15 years in establishment, and the program removes about 20 to 50 animals a year, and these are problem animals that are in and around the Bonneville Dam. And the similar work is being done in the Willamette River, and that has resulted in significant improvement in the number of steelhead. 2018, the act was amended once again to allow more latitude and more flexibility to implement the removal program. But the problem is that we're trying to secure funding, both federal and state funding, to administer the program, and that has been a very difficult task. Currently, there's an appropriations request to Congress in the tune of about $5 million to administer the program. But it is a critical part of the management of Northwest salmon. If we continue to just reduce harvest, we're not going to be able to make the headway that we need. About $17 billion has been spent on recovery efforts in the Columbia. Those are habitat restoration and protection. Those are augmenting flows to facilitate downstream migration and upstream migration. And those are constraining fisheries. And we're still continuing to move in the wrong direction. But it does give us some confidence that marine mammal management is part of the solution. And I think we're in a good spot moving into the future and moving forward in ways that meaningfully address that portion of the challenge when it comes to salmon and steelhead management.
Thank you for that, Larry. That's a good background on what's gone on in the lower 48. Next, I'd like to introduce John Curlin, the Regional Administrator for the Alaska region for NOAA Fisheries, to give a bit deeper dive from the agency side. And John, just want to thank you for all that you and your people do for Alaska.
Thanks. Maybe. Yeah, I guess we're on. Okay, good. Yeah, thanks. Larry teed this up well. So not surprisingly, seals and sea lions like salmon at least as much as we do. And as pinniped populations have expanded, have recovered over the years since the Marine Mammal Protection Act was put in place, we see increasing conflicts between seals and sea lions and humans. And that manifests in a lot of different ways. In Alaska, we've seen conflicts all over the place, from Petersburg out to Bristol Bay, between the pinnipeds and various human uses. And it happens in other parts of the country too. And so it does create some serious resource management challenges. So I'll explain a few things that NOAA Fisheries has been doing to address this. At a national level, our agency developed a proposed set of guidelines in 2020 with guidelines for safely deterring marine mammals. And the idea there is non-lethal measures that can be used to create some distance, to dissuade nuisance seals and sea lions, aggressive marine mammals from coming into these conflicts. And that's can be a variety of things. It can be human behavioral changes, being careful in your practices in fish cleaning stations and harbors, and in some cases, not having attractants available to these animals that are looking for a free lunch. They're looking for an easy way to feed. And in cases where it's needed, it's techniques to encourage the animals to move on. So sometimes that's acoustic devices, startle systems, a variety of different things have been used. So we issued these proposed guidelines. We haven't yet finalized them, although we still intend to do so. There's some relatively new science that's come out on the acoustic effects on seals and sea lions, and we want to make sure that we're fully incorporating that. So we are likely to come out with guidelines on the non-acoustic deterrence measures before too long, maybe within a year or so. The acoustic measures may take longer. Here in Alaska, my colleague Jenna Malik, who's in the audience, she's in our Anchorage office. She has been here in Soldotna and met with the Department of Fish and Game and others locally to get a handle on the situation with pinniped interactions with fishermen, as well as the salmon resource here. We have developed an informational flyer, and there are some copies on the table at the entrance here that has suggestions for avoiding conflicts and how to report those conflicts, those human seal sea lion interactions, including a dedicated email address for our staff. We're often asked, well, can we shoot them? And that is complicated under our federal statutory framework. Larry was describing this provision under Section 120 of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, that it's really a very narrow statutory provision to allow that. It allows for lethal removal of individually identifiable pinnipeds. So you have to know the specific animal that you're talking about that are feeding on salmon, and it's specific to threatened or endangered salmon or steelhead, or those that have been identified as likely to become threatened or endangered in the very near term, or there's a provision for the Ballard locks. So it was Congress creating kind of a very specific, tailored authority that doesn't apply here at this point. We don't have currently threatened or endangered salmon runs. And although we are responding to the petition that Danny was just talking about, we're not proposing threatened or endangered status at this point for Chinook salmon, and may not get there. The other tool that is potentially available under the Marine Mammal Protection Act is an allowance, an exemption from the overall prohibition on take of marine mammals, specifically for Alaska natives for subsistence use. So this allows for subsistence use for food, or for creating authentic articles of native handicraft and clothing. And that type of taking can be allowed consistent with historic cultural practices by Alaska natives. There are no particular permits that are needed. Anyone who's qualified can take marine mammals for subsistence use. The caveat is the taking cannot be accomplished in a wasteful manner. So you can't just shoot a bunch of seals. The seals can be hunted and harvested for subsistence use, but that use can't be wasteful. There is a framework under the Marine Mammal Protection Act for what we call co-management. That's joint management between NOAA Fisheries and an Alaska Native organization, specifically to make sure that there are good, sustainable subsistence use harvest practices in place. The umbrella organization for co-management in Alaska, the Indigenous Peoples Council on Marine Mammals, has been looking into a successor organization for a group called the Alaska Native Harbor Seal Commission, which has been defunct for a number of years, but trying to bring back a statewide harbor seal management, co-management body to be able to organize amongst tribes and regional Alaska Native organizations statewide to have good harvest practices in place. So if this is an interest on the Kenai and folks are interested in potentially seeing increased subsistence use, we'd certainly be happy to partner through co-management to try to facilitate that. And just along those lines, I would say, just in closing here, if the Kenai River Sportfishing Association or other users in this area are concerned about seals, conflicts with fishermen, or just preying upon the resource and would like to share information about that, NOAA Fisheries is open to hosting a town hall or creating some sort of a forum, an informal working group to get a better sense of the scope of the problem and to talk about non-lethal deterrence measures, as well as options for local tribes to pursue subsistence use, as I mentioned.
Thanks for that, John. Next, we've got Kurt Chamberlain, the Assistant General Counsel for the Chillista Corporation. That's the hat he's wearing today, though we're also appreciative of his other public service on behalf of all Alaskans and issues that KRSA cares quite a bit about. So, Kurt, I'd like to turn it over to you to offer perspective from Chillista and some of the background on this.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Kurt Chamberlain. I'm actually now Deputy General Counsel for Chillista Corporation. And a bit about our corporation. We're based out of Southwest Alaska, and we're a compilation of, our area consists of 56 tribes and 45 village corporations, and with a land mass about the size of Oregon in size. A lot of our communities depend heavily on a subsistence lifestyle. And as most of our communities are near the Bering Sea, a lot of them do harvest pinnipeds, seals primarily, in their cultural and traditional practices. Over the years, the hard economic conditions and lack of infrastructure in Western Alaska has led a lot of Native Alaskans to outmigrate into South Central Alaska, myself being one of them. I currently live in Wasilla. And as such, this 101B of the Marine Mammal Protection Act offers a unique opportunity for Native Alaskans along the coasts to continue this traditional lifestyle, and so they can continue these traditional practices of harvesting pinnipeds for traditional uses and subsistence uses. So one of the things our CEO, who does continue his traditional lifestyle out here, he traditionally harvests pinnipeds out of Prince William Sound, but one of the things we're looking at is collaborating with other groups within South Central Alaska to continue these traditional practices and maybe even have cultural camps. A great example for this is and I'm going to butcher the name because I haven't spoken Yupik in about 30 years, but it's Ayelpun Litnalvik out in Bethel. It's a cultural immersion school. And when we did a tour there, they had actually harvested a moose and were breaking it down and processing the meat for subsistence uses. And so there is a cultural immersion school in Anchorage, and a lot of tribes do have cultural camps around here. And so one of the things we're looking at working to do is collaborating with the other tribes, Native organizations, and user groups in South Central Alaska to continue these cultural practices and pass them on to the next generations. And on the Kenai River in particular, there is a unique opportunity for mutual benefit by reducing the number of pinnipeds that are harvested or that are targeting the salmon that are very much needed in the Kenai and other South Central Alaska rivers.
Thanks for that, Kurt. And I really want to acknowledge that Chillista has been a longstanding participant and supporter of Kenai River Sportfishing Association. And Andrew, your CEO, was actually the one who started talking about this a few years ago. So excited that we're finally able to put a panel together to talk about the opportunity for collaboration. And I think that's where I want to come back to Larry, because when you and I were talking earlier, and I'm glad you mentioned, Kurt, the real effort to do outreach. I don't want anyone listening to a panel to think that people are rushing out to do anything. There's a lot of work that goes into setting up collaborative relationships and ensuring that kind of social support for any activity. So, Larry, I'd appreciate if you talk a bit about what you started on, which is the multiple state and tribal nation collaboration that led to success in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the real success lies within the approach that the Northwest Treaty Tribes and the states have approached this challenge with, and that is defining the problem from a science standpoint. estimating the number of marine mammals. We want to celebrate that the Marine Mammal Protection Act has worked wonderfully in the Northwest. In almost all instances, obviously, we're still dealing with some southern resident killer whale challenges, but most of the marine mammal populations are doing well or recovering to sustainable and population, reaching capacity. So that's a great thing. But the problem is that as that happens and as we exceed some of those abundances, we see increasing levels of predation. Those levels of predation need to be quantified. This is how many marine mammals are out there. This is the bioenergetics modeling work that's done. This is the annual consumption or potential impact to recovery efforts. And then if you reduce or control the population by some level, then this is the amount of recovery you're likely to see. Now, that's a very simplistic answer to a complicated problem, but therein lies part of the solution. As we proceed to identify all sources of mortality and all sources of opportunity for recovery, then this just has to be part of the solution. And I really believe that that's what's going on. The Washington legislature, through support from the Northwest Treaty Tribes, has implemented several studies in Puget Sound. There's a few studies happening in Canada in the Salish Sea where they're quantifying the annual impact of harbor seals on coho salmon in Salish Sea, and it's upwards of 40% of the return. The challenge in Puget Sound, the bioenergetics modeling work that's recently been done suggests about 1.4 million juvenile fish are consumed per month by harbor seals. So this problem is substantial and the solutions are complicated. As John pointed out, the latitude which we have to make decisions or implement management measures is very limited. But there's starting with a strong science approach and defining the problem. This is what we don't want, is that there's a real opportunity for this to become emotional. There's a lot of folks out there that have a different idea about management than our industry and certainly the state, federal, and tribal managers. So we have to be really smart about the approach we take to conversations around the management of marine mammals. And I believe that they're doing it right. Although the scale in the Northwest is lagging a little bit behind. The ability for us to manage marine mammals in the Columbia is very regimented. They've got to capture the animal, they identify it as a problem, capture the animal, remove it to a remote location, and then humanely euthanize that. That requires a massive amount of legwork and work by staff that really care. And that's, again, another really challenge. But I believe we're heading in the right direction. And I believe that's at least the platform of success as we really dig into this issue.
I think, Kurt, I'd come back to you and just ask, I think you did some research for the panel, but looking at the different legal opportunities, are there any takeaways you had? I mean, part of the challenge in Alaska is things are always different. Laws designed for the lower 48 typically don't work up here. And kind of some of your takeaways as you think about opportunities to support cultural development, preservation, and coordinating with groups like the state and federal government.
So from one of the first thing we looked at was the bioethics of this undertaking. And our first demand and first requirement was first do no harm. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we are not over harvesting any animals to a point that may undermine the purposes of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and also balance that against the need of protecting certain species within the Kenai River. One of the things we looked at was comparing the Columbia River to the Kenai River, and that a lot of the predation in the Columbia River tended to happen of the adult salmon at the fish ladders, where a lot of the pinnipeds were hanging out right there because that was a choke point for the salmon as they came in, and it just turned into a feeding frenzy. Whereas in the Kenai River, if you look at the life cycle of sockeye and Chinook salmon, they spend a certain amount of their time in river before heading out to the ocean. And if the harbor seals or if the seals and pinnipeds are feeding in river over that period of time, they are capable of harvesting a much larger number of salmon. While not, while less in weight, they can harvest a much larger amount of raw numbers of salmon in there. And there we do need a lot more research in the effectiveness of what we're doing, but the potential for eliminating a lot of predatory downward pressure on the salmon is there, and that's something we definitely want to look at. But again, the first rule in this is do no harm. And in doing so, we're reaching out to a lot of the tribes. Siri, who's the regional corporation, the Kenai tribe, Ninilchik, a lot of the local tribes we're working with and trying to coordinate with and building up a consensus among them before we move forward on anything.
John, I want to come back to you and ask, and I apologize for not giving you this in advance, but can you talk about subsistence take, to the extent you know anything about it, statewide, that this is something that actually goes on around Alaska?
It absolutely is. So I mentioned IPCOM, the Indigenous Peoples Council for Marine Mammals, and that's the umbrella statewide organization for subsistence use. But then NOAA Fisheries has partnerships with, I believe it's currently seven or eight different Alaska Native organizations around the state. Some of them are regionally based, some of them are species focused, but it's everything from fur seals to ice seals to beluga whales to bowhead whales. There is, of course, in Alaska, there are traditions that go back a whole heck of a lot longer than the Marine Mammal Protection Act, hundreds, thousands of years of cultural dependence and sustainable subsistence use of these resources. And we're fortunate to have a statutory structure that accommodates that in the modern era, and fortunate that since we entered into these co-management arrangements, these formal agreements between NOAA Fisheries and these different Alaska Native organizations, we have had really good partnerships form where the Alaska Native organizations participate actively in harvest monitoring, in obtaining biological samples, in educating hunters on sustainable practices, in assisting Western scientists with research and contributing traditional knowledge as well to enrich the scientific information that can be brought to bear on management. In most cases, subsistence use isn't regulated at the level of having permits or harvest quotas. We do, for northern fur seals, have some regulations that set an overall ceiling on the number of animals that can be taken. But even in that case, where there is a regulatory framework in place because the population is depleted, and there was a history of overharvest for commercial purposes, not for subsistence purposes, but even in that case, a lot of the day-to-day responsibility is in the hands of the tribe and the hunters themselves. So we're in a good place with that. And I think there is certainly potential, as Kurt was describing, for working with tribes that are interested in trying to expand these opportunities and keeping it sustainable.
Appreciate that. I think I'd come back to Larry for kind of a bit of wrap up in terms of bringing back. I think we went through those statistics pretty quickly, but I don't believe we know enough about what goes on in the Kenai River specifically. I appreciate Kurt mentioning the science side of it, but if you could run through again just the implications of some of that predation that you're seeing in the lower 48, those are pretty striking statistics, and I think they'd bear repeating.
Yeah, thank you. Not exactly sure how applicable the transfer of the program, other than just the overarching acknowledgement that increasing predation associated with the success of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in areas that we're struggling from an ESA standpoint. We just have to be cognizant that you can't just throw money at the problem. Again, $17 billion with a B in the Columbia River, and we're still heading in the wrong direction. And lo and behold, Bonneville Dam is at river mile 148. So there's 140 miles of river below this one pinch point, which we've documented predation rates out that we used to expand. But that's, again, this is something that we hadn't seen before. So a science-based approach is from our lens, the critical pathway forward in terms of addressing the problem. There certainly is predation that happens, wherever we have salmon, and understanding what that predation is relative to our overall management objectives is a critical part of the overarching approach of addressing all sources of this. Again, if we just constrain fishing, we heard earlier about ocean productivity, and that's a significant challenge happening right now. We want to make sure we've got all the pieces in place so that when we see increases in ocean productivity, we can make sure we've got as many fish back to the river as we can. And clearly that involves all sources of mortality. We haven't touched on avian predation. That's a big issue in Washington right now. The Federal Migratory Bird Act has done wonders for increasing the number of cormorants and other predatory birds. But they're all part of this larger management approach that we need to be cognizant about. And so we want to work with our federal partners, state partners, Congress, to make sure that these these regulatory agencies have the tools they need to address all of the problems, including predation by marine mammals.
Well, thanks for that, Larry, and Kurt. Thank you for your creative thinking, and I think we all have a lot of collaborating to do ahead of us. It reminds me of what we heard on the earlier panel about the importance of new ways of approaching issues, and I think it's clear, given John, thank you, the background on the limitations in the MMPA, that's not necessarily the right tool to think about in Alaska, but thinking broader about the subsistence conversation is one where I think there's good potential for collaboration. And thank you for coming to the table. I'd ask if you have anything else to add there, Kurt.
No, like I said, I was in a pre-meeting. I'm a trial attorney. I can talk for days on end, but ultimately this is from a cultural standpoint, this isn't just confined to the Chalista area. The Aleut Corporation, a larger portion of their subsistence relies upon pinnipeds. The Bering Straits Corporation, Nana Corporation, Bristol Bay Corporation, and so there's a large segment of the population in South Central Alaska that can make large strides to preserve cultural practices, and I think this provides a unique opportunity, and I very much hope to see it expand for those purposes, and to protect a way of lifestyle that is becoming more and more difficult to protect. So I'm very excited about this opportunity and look forward to it expanding.
Well, with that, I think I'd like to ask the audience to thank the panel, and we'll keep things moving along on the agenda here. But thank you guys for your time. And I believe I saw the Congresswoman take a call real quick, so I'll give it just a second. I know we're a bit ahead of schedule. I want to first apologize to the Congresswoman, but also thank her for taking the time to come here today and for being the member of the delegation that has evaded the plague that's getting everybody around Alaska. So far. But Congresswoman Peltola is someone who really does a ton for Alaska in the areas especially that we as KRSA care about. And I know many of you know my nickname is Fish. I spent a fair amount of time working in Washington and nobody talked about fish as much as they have since Congresswoman Peltola came to Alaska. So thank you for your work on the issues and we appreciate you making some time for KRSA today.
Thank you. So just now I was remembering that last year when I came to speak to you all, I came running in like it was Price is Right because I wasn't prepared to be up on stage just yet. And then just now my father-in-law called me. He's out in Bethel and he called to say, yeah, when are you coming home? When are you coming home? They opened it wide open on Saturday, so this is an issue that's top of mind for every Alaskan. It's just one of those issues, and I know you all feel the same way. It's like, where do you even start? And I'm very, very pleased with the discussions that have been taking place. The whole reason I even ran 2 years ago was to elevate the fish issue. I just had this, and I mentioned this last year, I really felt like the fish issues that so many Alaskans are thinking about and worrying about were the best kept secret in Alaska, because I just didn't feel like even at the policy level or down in Juneau, people were really talking about this in a robust way. We see so many candidates who are running for statewide office who say, well, fishing is a really complicated issue. And then for those of us who are immersed in fishing, we think, no, it's not. This is a very simple issue. This is so simple, it's ridiculous. Like, can we just acknowledge how truly simple some of our fishing issues are? But having said that, nothing is simple. And one of the other things that I have realized is back in 2017, I was part of a program called Salmon Fellows, and this was a philanthropic effort to bring a cross section of Alaskans together to talk about fish, salmon in general. So the Salmon Fellows, the cohort that I was in with, there were 16 of us, and it was one of 2 cohorts. And I learned more as a Salmon Fellow, 18 months of having retreats with Ben Moore, Ricky Geese, another sport fisherman named Kevin Meyer, a different Kevin Meyer than I think most of you know. He's an English professor at UAS and an avid sport fisherman, as well as people from the Yukon River and Cordova and Southeast and Anchorage. And this is something that I think is really reflective of Alaska. I know a little bit about one section of my river. That's all I know about. I don't know about other gear types. I don't know a lot about other species. I don't know about other rivers. And this point really drilled into me during the Salmon Fellows, because I had imagined that all of their conservation efforts had been really easy. That's not even in the realm of possibility. Conservation efforts for salmon are in the history of humanity has been one of the hardest things. But I'm from the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. It's all like one, people just say Yukon-Kuskokwim together. But I don't really know people from their river. I don't know their commercial fishing system. I think for Alaskans, there is no other place than the place where you fish. That's where what you know. So it's so important for us from around our state. We have 12 regions in the state. If Alaska were its own country, we'd be the 18th largest country in the world. The vastness and the diversity of Alaska is tremendous. And having venues like this where we can come together from different sectors, different parts of Alaska, different interests is really important. Another big revelation for me during the Salmon Fellows is in Alaska, we talk about the three main user groups, subsistence, commercial, and sport fishermen, as though they're equal power, as though the same percentage of fish is divvied up among them. Subsistence fishermen and subsistence hunters combined, less than 1% of Alaska's resources go to subsistence users, both hunting and fishing. Less than 1%. So it is and I know the percentages are at almost as disparate for sport fishing. The amount of, I think, power that the commercial fishery has is tremendous. The fact that the Department of Fish and Game's #1 objective is ex-vessel value is very important. And it really shows that in Alaska, even though all of us put at least 6 fish away in our freezer a year, all of us across Alaska, especially on the road system, it's at least 6 fish a year. That has no economic value, according to Fish and Game. If you put away 200 fish a year, that has no economic value to Fish and Game, even if it means everything to the economics of your home. So I just, these are not in my prepared notes, but these are things that I think about a lot, and I don't hear people talking about in a broad way, that sport, commercial, subsistence are not equal players in this conversation. And I'm not saying that it should be equal allocation. I'm just saying it's not, and it never has been. But having said all that, all of us are equally interested in sustainability. All of us have seen with our own eyes in our lifetime this dramatic paradigm shift, where I went from, as a child until 2009, my #1 worry was, I hope I don't catch too many. I hope that set net doesn't have 80 fish in it, because I can only cut 40, today. And then I'm going to be stuck cutting more fish. That was our #1 worry. What a great problem, right? And then in 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, my worry was, I hope my net has more than single digits. I hope it has more than 5 fish. People upriver from me would put on Facebook, I took all of Friday off to cut fish. I caught 1 fish. And this is, putting fish away for your family. So it went from, insane abundance to worrying about, am I going to have enough for this feast? Or am I going to have enough to offer guests when they come? Am I going to have enough for my grandkid to teeth on? So it felt like a switch was just flipped. And how do we get abundance back? And of course, it's not going to be as quickly. Of course, it's going to take generations of fish life cycles to get back there. And even if we do every single thing that we need to do correctly, it's still probably going to take, some scientists are saying 60 years, 12 salmon life cycles to get back to that kind of abundance. And I'm not saying we sit back and wait 60 years and do status quo. I'm saying we have to do everything right starting now. And I think back to Ted Stevens' days when we had so much research money coming in, so many research funds, and somehow a lot of that base money has shifted to Washington State. It's been interpreted by federal interpreters as this money needs to go to treaty tribes. We don't have any treaty tribes. Or this funding needs to go to ESA listed species. We don't have those, thank God. And on that topic, this is universally of concern, this ESA listing, Endangered Species Act listing, because there isn't a river in Alaska where kings run alone. Kings run with reds and chums everywhere they run. And if we have an endangered species listing, we're not, even if they're in abundance, we're not going to be able to fish for reds and chums. We're not even going to be able to fish for resident fish if that ESA listing comes into place. So every single one of us will have dry nets. And that's not the solution we're looking for. That's not a real solution. That's my 2 cents on the ESA listing. And I am thankful for issues that we all say, no, this is impacting us equally. We all care deeply about this, and we're unified in this, and we are here with a joint voice to talk about how this is very damaging. The trollers from the lower 48, these are the extreme environmentalists that I talk about, the extremists. I'm, Alaskan environmentalists, they're our friends and neighbors. They rely on salmon too. They don't want a scenario where we're not going to be able to fish for anything. I'm not talking about Alaskans. I'm talking about extreme environmentalists, many of whom will never even set foot in Alaska, much less live here or depend on the resources like we do. And I did join our 2 senators in filing 2 amicus briefs with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I'm really proud to be part of this delegation, because Alaska's delegation has always been a leader in fish policy. Nobody can come close to the work that our delegation has done. I mean, the fact that it's called the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and then Don Young would joke that it was really he and do you remember his name, Anton? Yeah, it was somebody Studs was the other representative. And when it came from Jerry Studs. So when it came from the House to the Senate, it was called the Young Studs Bill. And then it turned into the Magnuson-Stevens Act, but its original name is Young Studs, which I think is great. But all of them have, and Dan Sullivan is no exception. Lisa Murkowski is no exception. Both of them have a very personal relationship with our seafood and our seafood industries. The other thing I want to say is just the fact that Alaska elected a pro-fish candidate, just the fact that we had that election, the trawling industry reduced their chum bycatch by 50%. Not one single law, regulation, ordinance, or action was taken, and they reduced their chum bycatch by 50%. That shows us that industry can make changes. We can do better. We can implement things to make things better in terms of bycatch. So we have 2 bills in the hopper. One restricts where bottom trawling can happen. The other one provides more funding for gear, cameras, salmon excluders, other things to reduce bycatch. And it ups the pot of money from $3 million a year to $10 million a year for 5 years. And then it also allows for private partnerships like Susan was talking about with NIFWIF for philanthropic donors who care about ocean health, who care about salmon, to donate the big money and make the 10 million that the federal government would put in look like peanuts. That's the hope. So all of this is to say, we are working on fish issues. We care about fish issues. We're elevating fish to a real national discussion. When I went to DC, people would joke about fish family freedom, and there's nothing funny about fish family freedom to anybody in Alaska, from the smallest child to the oldest person. It's not a joke. And we're really bringing that seriousness to DC. We started a salmon caucus with people from all regions of America. We're engaged in a long conversation with NOAA about the 10 national standards and really better defining 3 of them: allocation, bycatch, and communities. I thought that we would have those definitions by now, but government always surprises us with how slow they are. I don't know how this is a surprise, but things take a long time. And on fish, we can't do enough, and we can't do it fast enough. So I continue to be frustrated with the lack of movement, but then I have to step back and say, no, there has been movement. Just the fact that Alaskans wanted a pro-fish person in Congress reduced bycatch on chums by 50%. I think all Alaskans can pat themselves on the back for that and just keep moving forward. So I really appreciate KRSA and all the work that you do and the forums that you provide to keep people talking to each other. And you've definitely written the book on conservation and working with the community on riverine habitat, just the whole 9 yards. I think that a lot of people can learn a lot from KRSA, and we just really appreciate all the partnerships that you've pulled together and the annual event that this is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Peltola, for speaking today. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you all to the presenters who took part and volunteered their time to bring attention to these important issues. So this concludes the Kenai River Classic Roundtable event. Thanks, everybody.